That night, as Alara took her place on the penthouse stage once more, her violin felt colder, heavier. Her fingers trembled, not with fear, but with a profound, aching emptiness. She was a puppet, dancing on strings pulled by a cruel, unseen master. The music was a hollow echo of her soul, a symphony of despair playing against the backdrop of glittering indifference. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, steeling herself, unaware that tonight, the stage lights would illuminate not just a performance, but the path to a terrifying yet undeniable salvation. She was about to meet her devil, a man whose obsidian gaze would change everything. There in the Obsidian's most exclusive penthouse suite was a potent cocktail of money, power, and high-stakes tension. Thick, velvet curtains, the color of crushed plums, muted the vibrant chaos of the Las Vegas Strip below, creating a hushed, opulent world where fortunes were won and lost with a casual flick of a wrist. Alara Vance, seated on a raised dais crafted from polished ebony, poured her soul into a rendition of a Chopin nocturne, its melancholy beauty an ethereal counterpoint to the relentless click of poker chips and the low murmur of powerful men. Each note hung heavy in the air, a delicate thread woven through the scent of expensive Cuban cigars and aged scotch. She was merely background, a living, breathing soundtrack to their dangerous games, yet every fiber of her being felt acutely aware of the raw energy pulsating in her room. Her gaze, careful to remain unfocused, swept over the players gathered around the massive, felt-covered table. They were men carved from a different cloth, their tailored suits whispering of vast wealth, their faces etched with a blend of boredom and predatory focus. But one man dominated the space, even in repose. Silas Moretti. He sat at the head of the table, a king on a throne of quiet authority. He wasn't overtly flashy. His charcoal gray suit was impeccably cut, the silk of his tie a deep, unreadable midnight blue. But his presence was a physical force, a gravitational pull that drew every eye, every subconscious tremor. His dark hair, thick and slightly long, fell in an artful disarray that only enhanced the sharp angles of his cheekbones and jaw. And his eyes. They were the color of a stormy Atlantic, deep and fathomless, holding secrets Alara instinctively knew she never wanted to uncover. They possessed a lethal intelligence, a predatory glint that promised absolute control, absolute danger. He moved with an unnerving economy of motion, coiled spring ready to strike. As Alara's bow glided through a particularly poignant passage, the game at the table intensified. Voices, previously hushed, grew sharper. One man, a portly, sweating figure Alara vaguely recognized as a rival casino owner, slammed his cards down with a guttural roar. "You cheated, Moretti." "I saw it." Silas, to Alara's surprise, did not immediately react. His expression remained utterly impassive, a mask of stone. But the air around him crackled with a silent, simmering fury. The other players froze, their hands hovering over their chips, their faces pale. Alara's music faltered, a discordant squeak escaping her violin as a sudden, visceral fear gripped her. This wasn't a mere argument. It was a prelude to something far more sinister. Then it happened. In a sudden, violent lurch, as the angry casino owner scrambled to his feet, a slim, dark leather briefcase, previously resting by Silas's chair, was dislodged. It slid silently across the polished marble floor, heading directly for the agitated rival, its trajectory almost imperceptible amidst the rising clamor. Alara's eyes, wide with alarm, followed its path. She didn't think. Her instincts, honed by years of navigating precarious situations, took over. As the briefcase reached the edge of her dais, she subtly, almost imperceptibly, extended her foot, guiding it with the side of her delicate satin slipper. The brief resistance was enough. The briefcase changed direction, coming to rest neatly under the voluminous folds of her deep green performance gown, hidden from the angry man's view. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the encroaching chaos. What have I done? Silas's head finally turned, slowly, deliberately. His storm-gray eyes, now devoid of any warmth, impaled the furious casino owner. "You accuse me of cheating." His voice was a low growl, laced with a chilling calmness that was far more terrifying than any shout. It vibrated through the floor, through Alara's very bones. "Perhaps you are mistaken, Mr. Du Bois. Or perhaps," he paused, his gaze hardening to steel, "you are simply a fool." Before anyone could react, Silas moved. It wasn't a frantic lunge, but controlled, almost graceful flow of motion. In a blink, his hand shot out, grabbing Du Bois by the lapel, yanking him across the table with terrifying force. A bone-jarring thud echoed through the room as Du Bois's head slammed against the table's edge. He collapsed, unconscious. Silas released him with a dismissive shove, his eyes sweeping over the other players, daring them to challenge him. No one did. A tense, suffocating silence descended, punctuated only by Du Bois's ragged breathing. Then, those dangerous, obsidian eyes, so cold they could freeze blood, found Alara. Her breath hitched. The music died on her lips, her bow frozen midair. He looked at her, truly looked at her, with an intensity that stripped away her defenses, laying bare her secret act of defiance. There was no anger, no accusation, just a piercing, unnerving understanding. A flicker, almost imperceptible, passed through his gaze, something akin to appreciation, mingled with an unsettling sense of recognition. He knew. He hadn't missed a thing. Silas slowly rose from his chair, his presence expanding, dominating the entire suite. He walked towards Alara, his steps soft, deliberate, but radiating an undeniable power that made every muscle in her body tense. He stopped directly in front of her dais, his height towering over her, his dark eyes still locked with hers. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulling out a thick wad of bills, far more than her monthly earnings, neatly bundled with a crisp paper band. He then added a handful of rare, high-value chips from the table, their intricate designs gleaming under the soft lights. For the exceptional performance, Miss Vance, he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent shivers down her spine, not entirely from fear. He placed the absurd sum on the edge of her violin case, the money feeling like a branding iron. His fingers, long and strong, lingered for a fraction of a second against the cool metal clasp of her case, then brushed against the delicate lace of her sleeve. It was a possessive touch, a silent claim. I believe you've earned it. Alara could only stare, utterly overwhelmed. The money felt like a trap, the lingering touch a warning. His eyes, dark and fathomless, bore into hers, no longer merely appreciating her performance, but seemingly seeing into the very depths of her soul. She felt exposed, yet oddly seen. His gaze held a dangerous promise, a silent declaration that he understood her, and now he owned a piece of her. The fear was still there, a chilling undercurrent, but mixed with it was a burning curiosity, a terrifying magnetism she couldn't deny. He had seen her desperation, her small act of courage, and he had marked her. She tried to speak, but no words would come. Her mouth was dry, her throat constricted. Silas merely gave a slow, deliberate nod, his lips curving into a subtle, almost imperceptible smile that sent a shiver of profound unease, yet undeniable attraction, coursing through her. He turned, the silence in the room echoing his departure, leaving Alara paralyzed, the enormous sum of money a blazing beacon of his power and his terrifying newfound interest. She had just bought herself a momentary reprieve from Thorn, but she had undoubtedly stepped into a far more dangerous game, one orchestrated by a man whose gaze promised to claim her entirely. She knew with chilling certainty that her life, already on the precipice, had just irrevocably changed. The thin walls of Alara's apartment offered no sanctuary. Every creak of the aging building, every distant siren wail from the Las Vegas night seemed to amplify the suffocating silence within her small, cluttered living room. She sat huddled on her worn sofa, the lavish sum Silas Moretti had pressed into her hand now nothing but a mocking memory. It hadn't been enough. It would never be enough. The money, a brief, tantalizing glimpse of freedom, had been devoured by her grandmother's latest medical expenses, a gaping maw that swallowed every cent she earned, every breath she took. A harsh, insistent rap shattered the fragile peace. Alara flinched, her stomach twisting into a painful knot. She knew that knock. It was the precise, unyielding rhythm of a debt collector. It was Mr. Thorn. She dragged herself to the door, her legs heavy, her heart thundering a desperate rhythm against her ribs. Opening it just a crack, she met his cold, brassy gaze. He stood framed by the dim hallway light, his expensive suit a stark, offensive contrast to the faded wallpaper and the lingering scent of old coffee in her apartment. He exuded an aura of calculated menace, his smile a chilling, insincere curve. "Miss Vance," he purred, his voice slick and dangerously low, like oil dripping onto ice. "Running out of time, I see. My patience, regrettably, is not infinite. Nor is the obsidian's." He stepped closer, uninvited, forcing her to instinctively retreat. The subtle scent of his expensive cologne, usually a marker of wealth, now felt like the suffocating stench of decay. "Ah, I don't have it all, Mr. Thorn. Alara whispered, her throat tight with a fear so profound it stole her voice. Please, I just need a few more days. Elena's condition, it's critical. I can't leave her. Thorne's eyes, devoid of any warmth, narrowed. Elena. Always the ailing grandmother. A convenient excuse, perhaps? Or merely a burden you can no longer afford? He let his gaze drift around her meager apartment, lingering on the threadbare carpet, the chipped teacups on the counter. Such squalor. Not befitting a talented musician, is it? Or perhaps your talents are overstated, easily replaced. The insult burned, searing her pride. But what he said next extinguished any flicker of defiance. The eviction notice for this dump goes out tomorrow. And as for your dear Elena's critical condition, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Medical care has a way of becoming unavailable when bills go unpaid, especially when certain recommendations are made to hospital administrators. You understand, don't you, Miss Vance? Accident happen. Supplies run out. And reputable institutions prefer not to be associated with certain families. He paused, letting the implications sink in, letting the terror bloom in her chest. And then, of course, there's your pristine reputation. A classical musician, playing for high society. What a shame if whispers began to circulate. About a certain young lady, her father's notorious debts, perhaps even how she tried to scam her way out of them. Alara's breath hitched. He wasn't just threatening her livelihood. He was threatening Elena's life and her entire future. The very air seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of his malevolence. He had found every pressure point, every vulnerability, and was pressing down with all his might. 48 hours, Miss Vance. The debt in full. Or you will truly understand what it means to lose everything. Every last, precious thing. He finished with a chilling smile, turning on his heel and disappearing down the hallway, leaving Alara shaking, clinging to the doorframe as if it were the last stable thing in her collapsing world. Panic, cold and relentless, seized Alara. She spent the rest of the day in a frantic, desperate scramble. She called every number she knew, acquaintances from music school, distant relatives she barely remembered, even a small-time lawyer she'd found online. Each conversation ended the same way. A polite refusal, a sympathetic sigh, or a hurried hang-up. Thorne's tentacles reached far beyond the obsidian's glittering walls. A potential landlord she'd contacted mysteriously retracted her offer. The lawyer, after an initial enthusiastic consultation, abruptly ceased all communication, citing an unexpected conflict of interest. Alara could practically feel Thorne's shadow stretching across the city, suffocating every avenue of escape. The walls of her apartment, once a familiar comfort, now felt like the crumbling confines of a tomb. Her father's ghost seemed to mock her from the shadows, his reckless abandon, now her chains. Despair, thick and cloying, clung to her, a suffocating shroud. That evening, Alara moved like a phantom through the opulent halls of the Obsidian, her violin a leaden weight in her hands. The usual buzz of the casino floor, the vibrant energy of the high rollers, felt alien, distant. Her despair was a living entity, consuming her from the inside out. She was heading towards her regular performance slot, a mechanical movement, when a hand, firm and unyielding, closed around her arm. Alara gasped, spinning around, her heart leaping into her throat. Silas Moretti stood there, a dark, imposing silhouette against the shimmering backdrop of a crystal chandelier. His charcoal suit seemed to absorb the light, making him appear even more formidable, more dangerous. His eyes, those piercing, storm-gray pools, held a depth she couldn't fathom, a quiet intensity that simultaneously terrified and captivated her. Miss Vance, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a tremor through her. It wasn't a question, but a statement of absolute recognition, absolute control. He released her arm, but the lingering warmth of his touch felt like a brand. We need to talk. He led her, without waiting for a response, to a secluded, dimly lit alcove tucked away from the main thoroughfare. The air here was cooler, hushed, the distant casino sounds muffled. He gestured to a plush velvet bench, and Alara, too stunned to resist, sank onto it. Silas remained standing, towering over her, his presence utterly dominating the small space. Your situation, Alara? He began, his voice devoid of any emotion, yet carrying an undeniable weight. It has become untenable. Mr. Thorne is a nuisance. A small, irritating pest. One I can easily remove. Alara's breath caught. What are you talking about? She whispered, though a horrifying premonition was already forming in her mind. Your father's debts, Silas continued, as if she hadn't spoken. Your grandmother's medical care. Your current housing. The threats against your reputation. His gaze bored into hers, making her feel as though he could read every desperate thought, every silent prayer. I have acquired all the necessary documentation. All your outstanding obligations. They are now mine. Alara stared aghast. You paid Thorne? The words were a bitter taste on her tongue. Silas gave a slow, deliberate nod. And then some. He will trouble you no further. Nor will anyone else. Your grandmother will receive the finest care money can buy, without limit. Your housing will be upgraded. To my penthouse. Effective immediately. Her blood ran cold. The relief, a brief, fragile spark, was immediately extinguished by a wave of crushing dread. This wasn't salvation. This was a different kind of trap. A gilded one. What were your conditions? She managed to ask, her voice barely audible. Her pride screamed in protest, but the image of Elena's frail smile, of her peaceful rest, silenced it. Silas leaned closer, his scent, a sophisticated blend of oud and something undeniably masculine, enveloping her. His eyes, dark as obsidian, bore into hers, holding her captive. Conditions are simple, Alara. You belong to me. Your music, your time, your loyalty. You will live under my protection, within my walls. You will play for me, and for anyone I designate. Your life, your choices, will be under my purview. He paused, letting the stark reality of his words sink in. You are mine, to protect, to keep, to command. No one else will ever touch you, threaten you, or lay claim to you. Do you understand? The air crackled with unspoken power, with the crushing weight of her lost freedom. Alara's mind reeled, a furious battle waging within her. Her independence, her dreams of a life unburdened, screamed against this subjugation. She was being bought, owned, branded. Yet, the image of Elena, fading away in a sterile hospital bed, flashed before her eyes. The choice wasn't hers to make, not truly. It was already made for her. The choice between dying slowly, watching her grandmother suffer, or surrendering to this dangerous, possessive man. A single hot tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. It was a tear for the life she had lost, for the dreams that had shattered. I understand, she whispered, the words a bitter echo in the hushed alcove, a silent surrender. Silas's expression remained unreadable, but a subtle shift, a tightening around his eyes, suggested a flicker of something. Satisfaction? Triumph? Or perhaps something else entirely. He reached out, his long fingers gently, surprisingly, wiping away her tear. The touch was both tender and utterly possessive, sending a confusing jolt through her. Good, he said, his voice softer now, yet still carrying the undeniable weight of command. My men will be at your apartment within the hour to assist with your belongings and relocate your grandmother to a private, secure medical facility. You, Alara, will be safe now. Both of you. Within 2 hours, Alara found herself standing in a penthouse that dwarfed her entire old apartment. Walls of glass offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the glittering Las Vegas Strip, a million lights winking in the distant darkness. The air smelled of fresh linen and expensive wood, a stark contrast to the familiar must of her past. Plush, cream-colored rugs sank beneath her feet. Artwork, discreet yet undeniably valuable, adorned the walls. It was opulence personified, a sanctuary of unimaginable luxury. But it felt sterile, vast, and utterly empty. Elena, pale but serene, was already settled in a spacious, sun-drenched room, attended by a team of highly specialized nurses Silas had personally assigned. Her eyes, filled with a gentle confusion, flickered over her new surroundings. Such a beautiful place, darling, she'd murmured, her voice weak but content. Like a dream. For Elena, it was a dream. For Alara, it was a golden cage. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, pressing her hand against the cool glass. The city spread out below her like a glittering, indifferent jewel. She was safe, finally. Elena was safe. But the price was herself. She was Silas Moretti's possession, an ornament in his world, a bird in a gilded cage. She stared out at the sprawling, dangerous city, wondering if she had truly been saved, or simply traded one form of captivity for another. And as the night deepened, painting the sky with bruised purples and inky blacks. She knew, with chilling certainty, that her life, already on the precipice, had just irrevocably changed, and she was only just beginning to understand the true nature of her new owner. The penthouse, with its shimmering glass walls and panoramic views, was a sanctuary of unparalleled luxury, yet for Alara, it felt less like a home and more like a meticulously crafted prison. Every surface gleamed, reflecting the incessant glittering lights of the strip below. The air, conditioned to a perfect, constant coolness, carried the faint, expensive scent of polished wood, rare orchids, and Silas Moretti's own subtly intoxicating cologne, a blend of cedarwood and something wild, untamed. She was safe, undoubtedly. Elena, her grandmother, was thriving under the watchful eyes of a rotating team of private nurses, her room a serene haven of soft light and hushed medical equipment. The gnawing fear for Elena's life had receded, replaced by a different kind of unease. Alara's days unfolded with an unsettling precision. She awoke in a bed so vast and soft it felt alien, surrounded by silk sheets that whispered against her skin. Meals, prepared by a silent, efficient staff, were laid out with an artistry usually reserved for five-star restaurants. Every conceivable need was anticipated, every whim catered to, often before she even voiced it. Yet, this opulent freedom was a mirage. She couldn't leave the penthouse without a driver, accompanied by one of Silas's imposing, unsmiling men. Her phone calls were monitored, her emails ostensibly private, but she instinctively knew they weren't. She was a precious artifact, meticulously preserved under glass, observed from every angle. Silas himself was a study in controlled distance. Their interactions were frequent, yet always formal, punctuated by long, pregnant silences. He moved through his expansive domain with the quiet confidence of a predator, his presence a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of her new life. He would often be found in his office, a sleek expanse of dark wood and cutting-edge technology, the hushed murmur of phone calls drifting from behind its soundproof doors. Alara, practicing her violin in the grand living area, would often catch glimpses of him through the glass partition, a dark silhouette against the city lights, his hands steepled beneath his chin, his storm-gray eyes fixed on some unseen point. She couldn't shake the feeling that even in those moments, his awareness of her was absolute. He rarely spoke directly about her obligations, but his expectations were clear. She played for him almost every evening, usually after his dinner, in the sprawling living room. The grand piano often sat idle, a silent, elegant monolith, but her violin was his constant companion. He would recline on a plush leather sofa, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his gaze rarely leaving her. It wasn't the appreciative stare of a connoisseur, but something deeper, more elemental, an almost possessive absorption. Her music, once her solace, now felt like a performance for an audience of one, a demanding, unblinking eye. Her first instinct was to hide it from Silas, to protect him, perhaps, from the complications she brought into his world, or perhaps to protect herself from the inevitable escalation, the ruthless violence she knew would follow. She folded the note tightly, shoving it deep into the pocket of her silk robe, her heart racing. I can handle this, she told herself, a desperate, hollow lie. I've handled worse. She tried to be more vigilant, to scan her surroundings with renewed intensity. But paranoia was a corrosive acid, eating away at her composure. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking menace. Every unexpected sound sent jolts of fear through her. She felt like a hunted animal, trapped in a luxurious, inescapable snare. She began to play her violin with a frenetic energy, trying to outrun the fear, to drown out with the sheer force of her music. The final straw came during one of her rare permitted trips to the penthouse's private outdoor terrace, a sprawling oasis of manicured greenery high above the city. She had brought her antique violin, hoping the fresh air and the distant hum of the city would soothe her frayed nerves. She set it carefully on a small marble table while she adjusted the music stand. When she turned back, a thin, almost invisible scratch marred the pristine, polished surface of the wood. A precise, deliberate score, just above the bridge, right where the delicate soundpost rested. It wasn't accidental. It was a message. A clear, unmistakable act of desecration against the one thing she held most sacred. A choked cry escaped her lips. Her violin, her solace, her connection to her past, violated. The scratch felt like a wound on her own skin, a brutal intrusion into her soul. Her attempts to maintain a semblance of control shattered. Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious, blurring the glittering city lights into a kaleidoscopic nightmare. She fell onto the marble bench, clutching the defiled instrument, sobbing uncontrollably. Silas found her there. He emerged from the sliding glass doors, a dark, imposing figure against the sunset-streaked sky. His presence, usually a source of veiled intimidation, now felt strangely comforting in her utter brokenness. He didn't speak, didn't approach immediately. He simply stood, watching her, his storm-gray eyes absorbing her pain, her devastation. The silence stretched, heavy with her grief and his unspoken assessment. When her sobs finally subsided, leaving her raw and exhausted, Silas moved. He knelt before her, his posture surprisingly gentle despite the controlled power in his movements. His fingers, strong and calloused, reached out, lightly tracing the fresh scratch on the violin's wood. His expression was grim, his jaw clenched, but his eyes, when they met hers, held a flicker of something she hadn't seen before. Cold, unwavering fury, utterly devoid of mercy. "Who did this, Alara?" His voice was a low, dangerous growl, barely a whisper, yet it vibrated with a terrifying intensity that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. "Tell me." She hesitated, fear still battling with a strange, burgeoning trust. But the image of Thorne's cruel smile, the threat to Elena, flashed in her mind. She knew, instinctively, that this new threat was a direct challenge to his authority, his protection. She pulled the crumpled note from her pocket, unfolding it with trembling fingers and handing it to him. Silas read it, his face hardening into an expression of chilling rage. His thumb, usually so precise, rubbed thoughtfully over the snapped violin strings in the crude drawing. "A viper," he murmured, his eyes narrowing to dangerous slits. "Trying to test my ownership. A fool." He looked at her, his gaze possessive, intense. "You try to hide this. You try to handle it yourself." It wasn't an accusation, but a statement of undeniable truth. Alara flinched. I didn't want to bring more trouble to your door," she admitted, her voice hoarse. "I didn't want to be a burden." Silas stood, pulling her up gently by the arm, his grip firm. He didn't release her. Instead, he pulled her closer, until her body was pressed against his hard, unyielding frame. The scent of him, dangerous and intoxicating, filled her senses, overwhelming the lingering fear. "You are not a burden, Alara," he stated, his voice a low, possessive rumble that vibrated through her chest. "You are mine, and what is mine is protected." Absolutely. Unquestionably. He looked out at the glittering city, his eyes blazing with a cold, terrifying resolve. "This is a message meant for me, and I will answer it, in a language they will understand." His grip on her tightened, a silent reassurance, but also a stark reminder of his claim. "They want to see if they can use you to destabilize me. They will learn that touching what is mine is a declaration of war. A war they will lose." The next few days were a blur of hushed phone calls, intense meetings in Silas's office, and a palpable shift in the atmosphere of the penthouse. The subtle surveillance became overt, then retreated, replaced by an unnerving silence. Alara didn't see the direct aftermath, but she heard whispers. Whispers of a once thriving underground gambling ring suddenly collapsing, its owner mysteriously disappearing. Rumors of a prominent art dealer, known for his unsavory connections, finding his entire collection confiscated and his finances obliterated overnight. There was no direct link to Silas, but the timing was too precise, the efficiency too brutal. One evening, Silas came to her as she sat practicing, her violin still bearing its small, ugly scar. He stood before her, his face impassive. "The threat has been neutralized," he stated, his voice calm, utterly devoid of emotion, yet carrying the chilling weight of finality. "He will bother no one again. Ever." His storm-gray eyes met hers, holding a silent challenge, a demand for understanding. He knew she understood the implications. He had destroyed someone's life, perhaps ended it for her. Alara felt a wave of shock, a cold dread washing over her. The sheer, uncompromising ruthlessness of his actions was terrifying. Yet, beneath the terror, a strange, complicated feeling stirred. A potent mix of fear and an undeniable sense of absolute safety. He was a monster, perhaps, but her monster. He had wielded his terrifying power, not against her, but for her. He had protected her, claimed her, in a way no one ever had. Silas reached out, his finger gently touching the scarred wood of her violin. Then his gaze lifted to hers, dark and intense. "No one touches what's mine, Alara," he reiterated, his voice a low, possessive rumble. "No one. Ever again." His words were a warning, a promise, and an unshakable declaration of ownership. And as he stared at her, Elara felt a tremor pass through her, a frightening realization that this dangerous, possessive man, who had just unleashed untold devastation for her sake, was slowly, irrevocably, becoming her anchor in this terrifying new world. The golden cage, she realized, was far more complex than she had ever imagined, and she was beginning to find a strange, unsettling comfort within its fiercely guarded walls. The echoes of Silas's brutal efficiency lingered in the penthouse, a cold, stark reminder of the world she now inhabited. Elara still felt a tremor of fear whenever she remembered the chilling finality in his voice, the ruthless gleam in his eyes when he spoke of the neutralized threat. Yet, paradoxically, a strange, unnerving sense of peace had settled over her. Elara's heart hammered, a frantic drum against her ribs. She tasted fear, metallic and bitter. "What do you want, Thorn?" she rasped, trying to inject some defiance into her voice, though it trembled uncontrollably. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "What do I want? I want to watch Moretti burn. And you, little canary, are the spark." He stepped closer, his breath hot and putrid against her face. "Did he tell you, Elara? About your father? How easy it was to ensnare him in that gambling debt. How Moretti's people provided the loan sharks that kept him desperate. How his own family subtly pushed him towards the obsidian, knowing his weakness." Elara's mind reeled. "No, my father, he wouldn't." "Wouldn't what, Elara?" "Wouldn't walk straight into a trap set by the very man who now saved you." Thorn's eyes gleamed with malicious glee. "Silas Moretti doesn't save people, Elara. He acquires them. He finds their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities, and he uses them. Your father was a pawn. You were a pawn. A very pretty, very talented pawn, but a pawn nonetheless. He let you believe he was rescuing you, didn't he? A knight in shining armor? Don't be so naive. He saw your vulnerability, saw the threat you posed to his clean image if you exposed the truth about your father's real creditors, and he simply decided to consolidate his assets. You're just another acquisition, Elara. A trophy." His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. A cold dread, far deeper than any fear for her physical safety, seeped into her bones. Silas. Had he truly? No. He cared for me. He kissed me. He saw my pain. Her heart, once so full of a terrifying, burgeoning love, now felt as though it were being ripped apart, torn between the desperate need to believe him and the chilling logic of Thorn's accusations. Was I really just an asset? A clever acquisition? He doesn't care about you, Elara, Thorn continued, pressing his advantage, his voice dripping with venom. He cares about appearances. About control. About owning the pretty little bird who sings on command. He chuckled, a truly evil sound. He'll be out there now, frantic, tearing the city apart. Not for you, my dear. For his own wounded pride. For the public humiliation. Because you, Elara, are a symbol of his supposed invincibility. And I've just shown the world that he's not invincible at all. He's utterly vulnerable. And so are you. He then produced a small silver knife from his pocket, the blade gleaming menacingly under the harsh light. And now, little songbird, we're going to send him a very personal message. One that will scar him far deeper than any public insult. He took a step towards her, his eyes blazing with a deranged triumph. Elara's breath hitched, her mind reeling, consumed by a terrifying cocktail of despair, betrayal, and the cold, unshakable certainty that she was utterly alone. Silas. Could he have? The world spun, her hopes crumbling to dust. Her fear of death was now intertwined with a far more profound agony, the agonizing question of whether the man who had promised her safety, who had ignited a dangerous spark in her heart, was truly nothing more than a ruthless manipulator. Thorn's shadow loomed, the cold steel of his knife reflecting the single harsh bulb. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable, a silent, heartbroken whimper escaping her lips. Somewhere, in the distant recesses of the building, a muffled, guttural roar echoed. The sound was faint, distorted, but unmistakably human, filled with a primal, unleashed fury. It was a sound that both promised and terrified, a sound that spoke of utter devastation. Elara's eyes snapped open, a flicker of desperate, impossible hope stirring within her despair. Silas. But was it hope for rescue or a final agonizing confrontation with the truth? The door to her prison suddenly shuddered, rattling violently in its frame, as if something impossibly strong was trying to tear it from its hinges. The roar Alara heard was not a figment of her shattered hope, not a cruel trick of her desperate mind. It was Silas, a primal guttural sound that tore through the thin metal door, vibrating through the cold concrete floor beneath her. It was the sound of a force unleashed, a monster awakened, pure, unadulterated fury given voice. The very air in the damp, freezing room seemed to crackle, charged with an imminent, devastating violence. Outside, in the labyrinthine underbelly of the forgotten industrial complex that served as Thorne's makeshift lair, Silas Moretti moved with the deadly precision of a seasoned predator. His face was a mask of granite, carved by an inferno of rage that burned hotter than the Las Vegas sun. The public humiliation at the gala had been a spark, but the cold, paralyzing fear that had seized him when he saw Alara torn from the stage, her terrified scream muffled, had ignited a conflagration. His Alara, his beautiful, fragile songbird, violated by the thought was a searing brand on his soul. He had mobilized his entire network in seconds. The city, usually a playground of shadows and secrets, became a living map of his vengeance. Every camera feed, every informant, every whisper of the wind was pulled into his relentless pursuit. He didn't wait for reports. He led the charge, a dark storm front descending on the underbelly of Vegas. His men, a phalanx of silent, efficient enforcers, followed in his wake, knowing that tonight, the usual rules were suspended. Silas was beyond reason. He was pure, unadulterated wrath. They had traced Thorne to this derelict warehouse district on the fringes of the city, a forgotten relic of rusted metal and broken dreams. The building itself was a sprawling, skeletal structure, its corrugated iron sides scarred with graffiti, its windows boarded up like vacant, dead eyes. The air here was thick with a metallic tang of decay, the acrid scent of damp concrete, and the chilling promise of violence. The first Volkov guard fell silently, a garrote expertly applied by one of Silas's lieutenants. But Silas didn't have time for stealth. He kicked open the heavy, rusted metal door, the sound echoing like a cannon shot in the cavernous space. "Alara!" he roared, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings, a terrifying declaration of war. The warehouse erupted. Volkovs, lurking in the shadows, opened fire. The air immediately filled with the deafening roar of automatic weapons, the sharp crack of bullets ricocheting off metal beams, the smell of gunpowder stinging Alara's nostrils even from her confined space. She pressed herself against the cold, grimy wall, every muscle in her body screaming in terror, her breath catching in her throat. The rapid-fire chaos was apocalyptic. He's here. He's truly here. Through the flimsy door, Alara could hear the brutal efficiency of Silas's assault. His men were good, but Silas was a force of nature. He didn't just direct, he executed. She heard his low, dangerous commands, punctuated by the sickening thud of bodies hitting concrete, the choked gurgle of a dying man. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence, a dark blur cutting through the flickering, chaotic light. He moved with a speed and ferocity that was almost inhuman, each movement precise, lethal. He wasn't just fighting. He was obliterating, driven by an almost psychotic need to reach her. Her music was a desperate prayer, drowning in colossal debt and a cruel manager's threats against her dying grandmother. During a brutal high-stakes game, a dangerous stranger, Silas Moretti, witnessed her quiet defiance. He violently crushed his rival, then declared her debt paid, his obsidian gaze claiming her entirely. Now safe but utterly owned, she plays for the city's most obsessed Mafia boss Billionaire. The air in the obsidian's grand lounge shimmered, thick with the scent of expensive cigars, clinking ice, and the faint, metallic tang of ambition. Alara Vance drew her bow across the strings of her antique violin, coaxing a mournful, cascading melody from the polished wood. Her eyes, usually vibrant hazel, were dulled by exhaustion as they swept over the glittering expanse of the casino floor, a sprawling tapestry of flashing lights and desperate hopes. Each note she played was a desperate prayer, a fleeting whisper against the cacophony of slot machines and the triumphant roars of winners. At 24, Alara should have been soaring, her talent recognized, her future bright. Instead, she was tethered to this gilded cage, a performer for a clientele who saw her not as an artist, but as part of the opulent backdrop. Her fingers, nimble and precise, moved with an almost ethereal grace, a stark contrast to the suffocating weight that pressed down on her chest. The music was her only escape, a fragile shield against the brutal reality awaiting her beyond the velvet ropes. Every dollar she earned, every weary breath she took, was for Elena, her grandmother, whose fragile life now hung by the thinnest of threads. The 4 drips, the incessant monitoring, the specialist hushed voices, they all translated into impossible numbers on a growing stack of hospital bills. Elena was the last shard of family Alara had left, a beacon of unconditional love in a world that had become increasingly cold and unforgiving. The debt was a phantom limb, an aching void that never truly disappeared. It was her father's legacy, a monumental sum accumulated from reckless bets and desperate chases for one big win before his sudden, untimely death. He loved her fiercely, but that love had left her buried under an avalanche of obligation. The casino held the promissory notes, legally binding and utterly merciless. Specifically, Mr. Thorne held them. Alara felt his presence before she saw him, a ripple of unease in the polished, indifferent elegance of the lounge. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled. Thorne was the Obsidian's manager, a man whose smile never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He moved with an oily grace, a predator in a perfectly tailored suit, his expensive cologne doing little to mask the stench of corruption that clung to him. Tonight, he paused near the edge of the stage, a half-empty tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. His gaze was a physical touch, crawling over Alara's slender form, leaving a trail of disgust in its wake. She stumbled a note, a jarring dissonance in the otherwise flawless performance. Shame, hot and prickly, flushed her cheeks. She swallowed, forcing her fingers to regain their composure, her bow to steady. Thorne simply arched a brow, a silent, contemptuous smirk playing on his lips. He knew. He always knew when she was faltering, when the pressure was crushing her. It was a game to him, a cruel amusement. Later, as Alara packed her violin into its worn velvet-lined case backstage, the sterile, fluorescent lights hummed a desolate tune. The heavy scent of stale smoke and cheap disinfectant filled the cramped space. A sudden sharp rap on the door made her jump, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew it was him. Or Miss Vance, his voice purred through the thin wood, laced with an unpleasant blend of mock politeness and thinly veiled menace. A moment of your precious time. Alara's breath hitched. She opened the door just enough to see his face, his features cast in harsh, unforgiving shadows. His eyes, the color of tarnished brass, glinted with an almost joyful cruelty. The payment, Miss Vance, he began, his voice dropping to a low, intimate growl that made her skin crawl. It's due. And as you know, the Obsidian is not known for its generosity regarding extensions. I have most of it, Alara stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. She clutched the violin case like a lifeline, the cool leather a small comfort. Just a few more days, Mr. Thorne. Elena's treatments are expensive. A cold, mirthless chuckle escaped his lips. Elena. Always Elena. A pity, truly. Such a lovely woman, so frail. It would be a shame if anything were to happen to her medical care, wouldn't it? Or perhaps, if the humble violinist found herself without a home, forced to ply her trade on the unforgiving streets? You have talent, child, but even a Stradivarius needs a stage, and a home to return to. His words were poison, each syllable twisting the knife of her fear. Alara felt a wave of nausea. He wasn't just threatening her, he was threatening her grandmother, her very existence. The thought of Elena, so fragile, being forced out, losing her vital care, made Alara's vision blur with unshed tears. I'll get the rest, she promised, her voice laced with a desperate resolve she didn't truly feel. I swear it. Thorne merely smiled, a predatory flash of white in the dim light. Good. 48 hours, Miss Vance. After that, my patience, like your father's luck, will run out. And I assure you, you won't like the alternatives. He lingered for a moment, letting his eyes rake over her one last time before finally turning and melting back into the shadows of the corridor, leaving behind a chilling silence that felt heavier than any threat. The next morning, the desperation gnawed at her, a ravenous beast in her gut. She visited old Mr. Henderson, a kindly pawnshop owner on the seedier side of town, his shop smelling of old wood and forgotten dreams. Her violin, a family heirloom passed down for generations, felt impossibly heavy in her trembling hands. Its warm, polished surface, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a burden. It's a beautiful instrument, Alara, Mr. Henderson said, his voice gentle, his eyes full of sympathy as he examined the violin with a practiced eye. A true piece of art. But the market, it's tough right now, especially for something of this caliber. And the paperwork for authenticated instruments like this, it's a nightmare for a small shop like mine. He shook his head regretfully. I'm sorry, child. I can't offer you what it's truly worth. Not even close. It would be an insult to the instrument, and to you. Alara's heart sank, a stone plunging into an icy abyss. Her last hope. Crushed. The glint of disappointment in Henderson's eyes, the knowing pity, was almost as unbearable as Thorne's threats. She knew, deep down, this wasn't just the market. This was Thorne's doing. He had a way of reaching into every corner of her desperate world, ensuring no escape. He wanted her utterly broken, completely dependent. Walking back through the blazing Las Vegas sun, the neon signs of the Obsidian seemed to mock her, flashing promises of fortune and glamour she could never grasp. The heat pressed down, suffocating her, mirroring the crushing weight on her soul. She was trapped, truly, irrevocably trapped. The city lights, usually a dazzling spectacle, now felt like 1,000 judging eyes, watching her descent into the abyss. There was no escape. Not anymore. One evening, during one of these private concerts, Alara's bow slid across the strings in a particularly heartbreaking passage. She noticed Silas's hand clench almost imperceptibly around his glass. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. For a fleeting second, the impenetrable mask he wore seemed to crack, revealing a glimpse of raw, buried emotion, perhaps sadness or even regret. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but it ignited a spark of curiosity in Alara. Who was this man, really? What had he lost? What was he hiding beneath that formidable exterior? His care for her, though unspoken, was undeniable. She woke one morning to find a brand-new, exquisite violin case, crafted from the finest leather, waiting for her, adorned with a small, perfectly carved ebony phoenix. Her antique instrument, the one Mr. Henderson had been reluctant to buy, was tucked safely inside. There was no note, no grand gesture, just the silent, undeniable evidence of his attention to detail. She needed new sheet music. A complete collection appeared on her digital tablet. Her favorite blend of tea, a rare, expensive jasmine, materialized in the pantry. It was a suffocating thoughtfulness, a demonstration that he knew her every need, her every preference, sometimes even before she did. It was unnerving, yet a tiny, rebellious part of her felt a warmth bloom in her chest. He saw her. He truly saw her not just as a possession, but as an individual with tastes and desires. This confused her, stirring a dangerous mixture of fear and something akin to gratitude. The moments of accidental proximity were the most potent. Once, as she reached for a piece of music on a high shelf, Silas, emerging silently from his office, reached over her shoulder, his arm brushing hers. The subtle scent of him, that primal masculine aroma, invaded her senses, sending a dizzying jolt through her. His hand, strong and warm, was so close to hers. She felt the heat radiating from his body, the latent power in his lean form. He retrieved the music effortlessly, his movements fluid. Careful, he murmured, his voice a low rumble near her ear, sending a delicious shiver down her spine. Don't strain yourself. He didn't meet her eyes, but the moment hung heavy between them, charged with an undeniable electric tension. Her breath caught, her fingers trembling as she took the sheet music from him. Another time, during a late-night performance, Alara closed her eyes, lost in the intricate beauty of the music. When she opened them, Silas was standing just feet away, closer than usual. His eyes, usually veiled, were open, unguarded, reflecting a profound melancholy that startled her. For a split second, she saw past the Mafia boss, past the impenetrable armor, to a man who carried a deep, silent weight. He quickly averted his gaze, turning to stare out at the city, the moment of vulnerability gone. But it had been there. A fleeting glimpse behind the curtain, a crack in the obsidian. These small, almost imperceptible interactions, the subtle acts of care, the flashes of unexpected emotion, began to chip away at Alara's carefully constructed defenses. She still feared him, feared the power he wielded and the control he exerted over her life. She resented the loss of her freedom, the constant feeling of being watched. Yet she couldn't deny the strange, intoxicating pull she felt towards him. Her mind, logical and rational, screamed at her to resist, to despise him. But her body, her heart, were beginning to betray her. At night, lying awake in the vast, silent bed, she would replay their interactions, dissecting every glance, every word, every accidental touch. His storm-gray eyes haunted her dreams, sometimes cold and dangerous, other times filled with that inexplicable, fleeting sadness. She found herself wondering about his past, about what had forged such a formidable, solitary man. A dangerous curiosity had taken root in her soul, a fragile, trembling vine intertwining with her fear. She knew this was perilous, a flirtation with a fire that could consume her entirely. But she was starting to wonder if, perhaps, she was already burnt. She was a moth drawn to a flame, desperately trying to deny the warmth, the mesmerizing glow. The golden cage, she realized, was slowly becoming less about her captivity and more about her growing, terrifying desire for her captor. And as the city lights continued their silent, relentless glitter, Alara felt a terrifying premonition. Soon, this delicate balance would shatter, and the first true threat to her new, complicated existence would emerge from the shadows, forcing her to confront the true depth of her feelings for the man who owned her. The golden cage, as Alara had come to call it, was indeed luxurious. Yet, despite the comfort and the unwavering care for Elena, a persistent hum of unease vibrated beneath the surface of her gilded existence. The sense of constant surveillance, though subtle, was palpable. Every door, every corridor, every shadow seemed to hold a watchful eye. It was a trade-off she'd reluctantly accepted for Elena's safety, but her independent spirit chafed under the unspoken control. The first unsettling incident was small, almost dismissible. A week after Thorne's eradication from her daily life, Alara decided to brave a supervised trip to a small, exquisite bookstore she adored, a quiet refuge from the casino's relentless pulse. One of Silas's men, a hulking figure named Grigori, silently shadowed her, a constant, imposing presence. As she browsed a shelf of rare sheet music, she felt a prickle on her neck, an undeniable sensation of being watched by someone other than Grigori. She glanced over her shoulder, her heart skipping a beat. A man, nondescript and blending perfectly with the afternoon shoppers, quickly averted his gaze, melting into the aisles. His sudden movement, too quick, too deliberate, sent a cold shiver down her spine. Paranoia, she told herself, trying to dismiss the knot tightening in her stomach. You're just adjusting to your new reality. But the feeling persisted. Over the next few days, it intensified. She'd catch fleeting glimpses of a black sedan, always a few cars behind Silas's convoy, on their rare trips outside the penthouse. A few times, the security cameras in the building's private elevator lobby seemed to flicker, just for a second, when she passed. It was unsettling, like a subtle discord in a perfectly tuned symphony, too faint for others to notice, but agonizing to her musician's ear. Then came the note. It was left on her piano stand, tucked beneath the Chopin she had been practicing. The paper was thick, expensive, but the words were a jarring scrawl, devoid of elegance. The songbird in the golden cage sings a pretty tune, but even cages can break, and golden feathers burn. There was no cinder, no signature. Just a crude drawing of a violin, its strings snapped. Alara's hands trembled as she clutched the note, the expensive paper crinkling in her grasp. The blood drained from her face, leaving her cold and clammy. This was no anonymous admirer. This was a threat. Personal. Intimate. It spoke of her music, her confinement, her vulnerability. A deep, primal fear, far more potent than anything Thorne had ever inflicted, clawed its way up her throat. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about danger, real and visceral. The constant, gnawing anxiety that had plagued her for years had quieted. She was safe. Elena was safe. The golden cage now felt less like a prison and more like an impenetrable fortress, fiercely guarded by a man who had declared her his own. One late afternoon, the city outside shimmering under a rare, gentle rain, Alara found herself drawn to Silas's office. The door, usually a silent barrier, stood ajar. She hesitated, a wave of trepidation washing over her. Intruding felt like trespassing on sacred, dangerous ground. But a faint, almost imperceptible sound pulled her forward, a soft, melancholic melody, played not on a piano, but on a hidden music box. It was a tune she didn't recognize, but its haunting beauty spoke of profound sorrow. Peeking through the crack, she saw Silas. He was not at his imposing desk, nor was he barking orders into a phone. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her, gazing out at the rain-swept cityscape. In his hand, he held a small, intricately carved wooden music box. His shoulders, usually ramrod straight, seemed to slump almost imperceptibly. The sharp, unyielding lines of his profile softened, etched with a raw, almost agonizing loneliness. The light from the window caught the silver strands at his temples, making him appear older, more burdened. He looked utterly vulnerable, a crack in the obsidian facade she had come to expect. It was a fleeting glimpse, a private moment of profound solitude that Alara felt she shouldn't be witnessing. The Mafia boss, the ruthless magnate, was gone, replaced by a man consumed by an unseen grief. A quiet creak of the floorboards betrayed her presence. Silas stiffened, his head snapping towards the sound, his movements quick and decisive even in his vulnerability. The mask slammed back into place, his eyes hardening, though a flicker of surprise remained. He closed the music box with a soft click, the melody abruptly silenced. "Alara," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Is there something you need?" She shook her head, feeling a blush creep up her neck. "No. I heard music. I didn't mean to disturb you." Her gaze fell to the music box in his hand, then back to his face, searching for the crack she just witnessed. It was gone, sealed away behind a wall of cold control. Silas merely nodded, turning back to the window. "It's a relic." His voice was low, almost reluctant. "From my mother." "It was beautiful," Alara offered softly, a strange boldness rising within her. The shared moment of unexpected intimacy, however brief, had shifted something. She suddenly felt a fierce, empathetic ache in her chest. Melancholy but beautiful. He remained silent for a long moment, the only sound the gentle patter of rain against the glass. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke, his voice gruff, yet tinged with a faint, unfamiliar vulnerability. "She died when I was young. Taken too soon. Before this life claimed me entirely." He didn't elaborate, but the weight of his words hung in the air, thick with unspoken pain. Alara understood. A loss, a wound that never truly healed, shaping the man he had become. The ruthlessness, she realized, wasn't just power. It was also a shield. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her own heart aching with the memory of her father's death, the slow, agonizing decline of her mother, and the constant threat to Elena. Losing someone, it changes you. Silas finally turned from the window, his storm gray eyes meeting hers, holding a rare, intense honesty. "It does." He paused, then gestured to a pair of plush armchairs. "Sit, Alara. There's something I need to understand." She sat, her violin case clutched in her lap like a shield. The air between them, usually charged with tension and unspoken demands, now felt different, softer, more fragile. He settled into the armchair opposite her, not looking away. "Tell me about your father," Silas commanded, his voice still firm, but lacking the usual edge of imperiousness. "Beyond the debts. What kind of man was he?" Alara took a deep breath, the words tumbling out, laced with a mix of lingering grief and fierce love. She spoke of his vibrant laughter, his impossible dreams, his passion for art and music that he'd passed down to her. She spoke of his flaws, his reckless gambling, the fatal flaw that led to their current predicament, but also of his unwavering belief in her talent, his constant encouragement. She painted a picture of a flawed but loving man, a dreamer in a world that demanded pragmatism. She spoke of Elena's unwavering strength, her quiet sacrifices. She spoke of her own dreams, not just to play, but to teach, to create, to use her music to uplift, to heal, to build something beautiful out of the ashes of their lives. Silas listened, utterly still, his gaze unwavering. He absorbed every word, every nuance, every tremor in her voice. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a deep, contemplative intensity. When she finished, the silence stretched, comfortable rather than suffocating. "Your father, he was a romantic," Silas finally stated, a hint of something akin to understanding in his voice. "A man who believed in a different kind of currency than power or coin." His gaze, usually so impenetrable, softened, lingering on her face. "You are like him in some ways, but you possess a strength he lacked. A steel beneath the silk." He paused, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You are resilient, Alara, and intelligent. More than just a talented musician. You see things. You understand." His words, a genuine acknowledgement of her character beyond her talent or her predicament, sent a surprising warmth spreading through her chest. It wasn't a compliment, but a recognition, a deeper validation than she had ever received. It was in that moment, hearing him speak of her resilience, her understanding, that Alara truly began to see the cracks in his obsidian facade. He wasn't just a force of nature, a ruthless mafia boss. He was a man who had loved, who had lost, and who carried the weight of his world with a profound, isolating loneliness. A man who, beneath the layers of power and control, might just be as broken as she was. The rain outside intensified, drumming a steady rhythm against the glass. The air in the office, previously so sterile, now felt charged, thick with unspoken emotions. Silas rose, walking to his bar cart, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. He offered one to Alara. "Drink," he said, his voice soft. "It will calm your nerves." Alara took the glass, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent a jolt, a familiar current of electricity, but this time it was laced with something new, a potent mixture of vulnerability and longing. She watched him, utterly captivated, as he raised his own glass, his eyes still holding hers. "To resilience, Alara," he murmured, his gaze intense, possessive, yet undeniably tender. "To building something beautiful from the ashes." She took a sip, the whiskey burning a warm path down her throat, settling a strange, exhilarating courage in her stomach. He was close now, standing over her, his presence a powerful, irresistible force. The air thrummed with unspoken desires, with a magnetic pull that had been growing between them. "You saw it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My fear. My desperation." Silas set his glass down on a nearby table, his eyes never leaving hers. He reached out, his hand slowly, gently cupping her cheek. His skin was warm, a stark contrast to the cold exterior he usually presented. His thumb stroked her skin, a feather-light touch that sent shivers through her. "I saw more than that, Alara," he said, his voice dropping to a low, husky whisper that sent her pulse racing. "I saw fire, and courage, and a soul that refuses to be broken." Her breath hitched. The words, the touch, the intensity of his gaze, it was overwhelming. Her logical mind screamed for caution, for escape. But her body leaned into his touch. Her heart thundered a new, dangerous rhythm. She found herself utterly lost in his storm-gray eyes, drawn into their fathomless depths. The line between captor and protector, between fear and fascination, blurred, then vanished entirely. Slowly, inexorably, Silas leaned in. His eyes dropped to her lips, a silent question, a powerful demand. Alara didn't pull away. She couldn't. Every instinct, every burgeoning emotion urged her forward. She met him halfway, her eyes fluttering closed as his lips finally, softly, claimed hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a hesitant exploration, but then it deepened, infused with all the unspoken tension, all the burgeoning emotions that had been simmering between them. It was demanding, possessive, yet utterly vulnerable, a fragile bridge between 2 fractured souls. His hand tightened on her cheek, his other arm sliding around her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. Alara's fingers, no longer clutching her glass, rose to tangle in his dark, thick hair, pulling him closer still. The whiskey on her tongue, the scent of him, the raw, undeniable hunger in his kiss. It was a dangerous intoxicant. It was the kiss of a man who had claimed her, and a woman who was, terrifyingly, beginning to want to be claimed. In that moment, the gilded cage melted away, replaced by the blazing heat of a connection that transcended fear, transcended circumstance. This was no longer just a deal, a trap. This was something far more profound, far more perilous. And as the kiss deepened, Alara knew, with a certainty that thrilled and terrified her, that her heart, once so carefully guarded, was irrevocably entangled with the dangerous man who held her. The fragile peace Alara had found in Silas's heavily guarded world was shattered by the insidious whisper of Mr. Thorne's revenge. Silas's swift, brutal retaliation for the violin incident had crippled Thorne's overt operations, leaving him a ghost in the casino's glittering machinery. But Thorne, a venomous viper, had merely retreated into deeper shadows, nursing a festering hatred and plotting a far more devastating retribution. The humiliation of being dismantled by Silas, of losing his grip on his lucrative, predatory enterprises, had twisted him into something even more dangerous. He sought not just to wound Silas, but to gut him, to expose his vulnerability, and Alara, the gleaming new acquisition in Silas's golden collection, was the perfect weapon. Thorne had aligned himself with the Volkovs, a brutal Eastern European syndicate, known for their cold efficiency and their penchant for public psychological warfare. The annual Moretti Foundation Gala shimmered under a moonless Las Vegas sky, a dazzling spectacle of philanthropy and veiled power. Silas, the impeccable host, moved through the ballroom of the Obsidian, a dark, commanding presence, his charm a potent, controlled force. Alara, radiant in a gown of midnight blue silk, clung to his arm, a beacon of fragile beauty by his side. Her heart still pounded with a mixture of awe and fear whenever she was in his presence, especially in such a public setting. Tonight, however, there was a new tremor, a sense of overwhelming pride. She was no longer just the terrified violinist. She was Silas Moretti's partner, his publicly acknowledged companion, her hand resting naturally in his, her music having found a new, powerful voice. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and champagne, the murmur of hundreds of powerful voices creating a symphony of influence. Silas had just guided her to the main stage, where she was to perform a special piece for the assembled dignitaries. As she bowed graciously, the spotlights illuminating her, her gaze swept the opulent room, catching a familiar glint of brassy eyes near one of the side exits. Mr. Thorne. Ilara's breath hitched. He was gone, his face thinner, etched with a raw, vengeful fury she had never witnessed before. He wore a simple, dark suit, a deliberate mockery of the lavish attire surrounding him. Beside him, two burly men with cold, unfeeling eyes watched her. Fear, cold and sudden, snaked its way around her heart. He shouldn't be here. She tried to catch Silas's eye to warn him, but he was deep in conversation with the senator, his back to her, utterly unaware of the viper poised to strike. Ilara's fingers, poised over the violin strings, trembled. Move, Ilara. Say something. But her voice was trapped in her throat, paralyzed by the sheer, public exposure of the moment. The music started, a soaring, powerful crescendo. Ilara poured every ounce of her terror, her burgeoning love for Silas, her desperate hope, into the melody. She closed her eyes, trying to block out Thorne's menacing stare, to lose herself in the only safe place she knew. Then a sudden, blinding flash. A piercing, high-pitched shriek. Not from her violin, but from a nearby speaker system, feedback tearing through the ballroom. The lights flickered, plunging the room into a momentary, disorienting semi-darkness. Chaos erupted. Shouts. Yes. In the confusion, Ilara felt a rough hand clamp over her mouth, another brutally yank her backwards from the stage. Her violin clattered to the floor, a mournful, jarring crash. She struggled, kicking and thrashing, but strong arms, reeking of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne, held her fast. Silas, she tried to scream, but her voice was muffled, swallowed by the confusion. She caught a glimpse of his face, turning, his eyes blazing with instant, terrifying fury as he registered her abduction. He moved, a dark blur of controlled rage, but it was too late. Ilara was dragged through a service door, into the cold, concrete labyrinth of the casino's underbelly. The scent of garbage and mildew filled her nostrils, a stark contrast to the lilies and champagne. The journey was a sickening blur of dark corridors, harsh lights, and the terrifying knowledge that she was being pulled further and further from any hope of rescue. Finally, she was shoved violently into a small, windowless room. The air was frigid, damp, smelling of rust and decay. A single bare bulb hung precariously from the ceiling, casting harsh, unforgiving shadows that danced with her rising panic. Thorne stood before her, his face the grotesque mask of triumphant vindictiveness. The Volkov's men, stoic and menacing, positioned themselves at the door, their arms crossed, their expressions devoid of humanity. Well, Miss Vance, Thorne sneered, a cruel satisfaction twisting his lips. The songbird has landed. Not quite the gilded cage you're used to, is it? Moretti's little prize. He walked slowly around her, his eyes raking over her silk gown, now torn and dirt-smudged. He thought he could simply buy you. Buy your talent. Buy your loyalty. Buy my silence. What a fool. There are some things, Ilara, that cannot be bought. Suddenly, a massive explosion ripped through the far end of the warehouse, sending a wave of hot air and debris rattling her small room. The bare bulb flickered violently, then died, plunging her into utter darkness. A strangled cry escaped her lips. The door to her prison shuddered again, then splintered with a deafening crack. Silas stood framed in the gaping doorway, a magnificent, terrifying vision. His expensive suit was torn, streaked with grime and blood, not his own. His dark hair was disheveled, falling across his forehead, and his storm-gray eyes blazed with a raw, untamed savagery that chilled Ilara to the bone. He held a silenced pistol, its barrel still smoking faintly. He was a creature of myth, a dark god of vengeance, come to claim his due. His gaze swept the dark, fetid room, instantly locating her huddled form in the corner. For a split second, The murderous rage in his eyes seemed to falter, replaced by a flash of raw, searing pain as he took in her tear-streaked face, her trembling body, the fear etched onto her features. Her silk gown, once elegant, was now soiled and torn. He saw Thorne's knife, gleaming on the floor where he had dropped it in his frantic attempt to flee. That glimpse, that tiny vision of her vulnerability, reignited his fury tenfold. Before Thorne, who had been cowering behind a stack of crates, could react, Silas moved. It was a blur of motion. He crossed the small room in 2 long strides, grabbing Thorne by the throat with one hand, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. Thorne's feet dangled uselessly, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. "You dared," Silas growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that shook the very foundations of the room. He slammed Thorne against the wall, the sound sickeningly loud. "You dared to touch her, to threaten her, to defile what is mine." Thorne gasped, clawing at Silas's hand, his eyes bulging in terror. "Moretti, I told her," he choked out, trying to buy time, trying to plant the seeds of doubt. "Your lies about her father." Silas's grip tightened, cutting off Thorne's air supply. His eyes, fixed on Thorne's terrified face, held no mercy, no recognition of humanity. "Your pathetic attempts at poison," he snarled, his voice laced with absolute contempt, "mean nothing. She is mine. And you are nothing." With a swift, brutal twist, a sickening snap echoed through the room. Thorne's body went limp, his eyes staring blankly, his head lolling at an unnatural angle. Silas released him, and Thorne's lifeless form crumpled to the floor like a discarded rag doll. Alara stared, her eyes wide with horror, a silent scream trapped in her throat. She had witnessed pure, unadulterated vengeance, swift and merciless. Her stomach churned, bile rising. Silas had just killed a man, right in front of her. For her. The brutal finality of it was staggering. Silas turned, his gaze sweeping over her, softening almost imperceptibly as his eyes met hers. The raw, animalistic fury still simmered beneath the surface, but it was now tempered by a fierce, overwhelming possessiveness, a desperate relief. He dropped his pistol to the floor with a metallic clatter, then crossed the remaining distance to her. He knelt, his powerful frame surprisingly gentle as he reached out, his hands carefully cupping her face. His thumbs brushed away the grime and tears from her cheeks, his touch feather-light, almost reverent. "Alara," he murmured, his voice hoarse, raw with emotion. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak, her body trembling uncontrollably. She was alive. But the terror, the cold, the sight of Thorne's lifeless body, the brutal efficiency of Silas's wrath, it was all too much. She felt a profound sense of shock and utter exhaustion that threatened to pull her under. Silas pulled her into his arms carefully, as if she were made of fragile glass. His embrace was fierce, overwhelming, yet imbued with a desperate tenderness. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent, his body shuddering with a silent, profound relief. "My Alara," he whispered, his voice thick with unspoken fear and an absolute possessiveness. "My beautiful, foolish Alara." She clung to him, her fingers clutching his torn suit jacket, seeking an anchor in the storm that raged around them and within her. His warmth was a sudden, intoxicating comfort against the biting cold. She could feel the hard muscle of his chest, the rapid, powerful beat of his heart against her ear. He smelled of smoke, adrenaline, and something undeniably, dangerously masculine, the scent of her protector, her captor, her undeniable truth. He lifted her, cradling her against him as if she weighed nothing, his strength an absolute, unwavering force. He carried her out of the blood-stained room, past the fallen guards, past the chaos, his strides long and purposeful. As they emerged into the dimly lit corridor, Alara caught a glimpse of his men, their faces grim, their weapons ready. They nodded to Silas, their expressions reflecting a mixture of awe and grim satisfaction. They understood. Their boss had reclaimed his prize. He didn't speak as he carried her through the echoing, desolate hallways of the warehouse. He simply held her close, his grip firm, his body a solid, unyielding fortress against the lingering menace of the night. Alara's head rested against his shoulder, her vision blurred, her mind reeling. She was rescued. She was safe. But the brutal truth of the man who held her, a terrifying, possessive love that had just laid waste to everything in its path, settled deep in her soul. It was a love forged in violence, tempered by fury, and utterly, irrevocably hers. And as he carried her into the cold Las Vegas night, leaving behind the shattered remnants of Thorne's revenge, Alara knew, with a terrifying clarity, that her life with Silas Moretti had truly just begun, and it would be a life defined by the raw, untamed power of his absolute possession. The journey back to the penthouse was a blur of motion and raw, disorienting sensation. Silas held Alara with an unyielding grip, his body a solid, warm fortress against the cold night air that bit at her exposed skin. She was beyond conscious thought, her mind reeling from the terror, the violence, and Thorne's venomous words. The scent of Silas, a potent mix of adrenaline, smoke, and his unique dark cologne, filled her senses, anchoring her to the present moment, to his undeniable presence. She could feel the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart beneath her ear, a thrumming testament to his own barely contained fury and fierce relief. Once inside the penthouse, the quiet luxury felt jarringly out of place after the chaos of the warehouse. Elena, thankfully, was asleep, safely ensconced in her own wing, unaware of the nightmare Alara had just endured. Silas carried Alara directly to her bedroom, a room that usually felt vast and impersonal, but now seemed like the safest haven on earth. He gently, carefully, laid her on the impossibly soft bed, his storm-gray eyes scanning her face, her torn gown, searching for any hidden injuries. His touch was surprisingly delicate as he moved, his large hands unusually precise. He fetched a first aid kit, a glass of water, and a thick, soft blanket. He knelt by the bed, his formidable presence softened by an intense, focused concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked again, his voice hoarse, a vulnerability in its raw edge that pierced through Alara's shock. She could only shake her head, her body trembling uncontrollably, the residual adrenaline making her muscles jump. The cold from the warehouse still clung to her, a chilling memory. He must have sensed it, for he quickly wrapped the blanket around her, tucking it in with a tenderness that defied her every expectation of the ruthless man she knew him to be. "Thorne," she whispered, her voice barely audible, the image of his broken body still vivid behind her eyelids. Silas's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "He's gone," he stated, his voice flat and motionless, yet carrying the unmistakable weight of finality. "He will never bother you again. Or anyone else." The implied brutality of his words sent a shiver down her spine, but this time it was laced with a strange, dark satisfaction. He had delivered. He had protected her. He then set about tending to the superficial wounds she hadn't even noticed, a scraped elbow, a bruised cheek from where she'd fallen. His fingers, calloused from years of wielding power, moved with a meticulous care that utterly disarmed her. He applied antiseptic, a cool, stinging sensation, then a soft balm. She watched him, mesmerized, seeing past the Mafia boss to the man beneath, the one who, in this moment, was simply caring for her. The rich, clean scent of his skin, mingled with the metallic tang of blood from his torn suit, filled her senses. It was a potent, dangerous cocktail that both terrified and strangely soothed her. While he worked, Alara's mind, slowly regaining its footing, began to replay Thorne's accusations. "Acquisition. He doesn't care about you." The venomous words echoed in her skull, battling with the undeniable reality of Silas's presence, his tenderness, his absolute ferocity in coming for her. Was this care just another facet of his ownership? A master protecting his prized possession? Or was it something more? Something deeper, more human than the ruthless world they inhabited? Silas finished tending to her, then sat on the edge of the bed, his hand gently cupping her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. His storm-gray eyes were no longer blazing with fury, but held a deep, troubled intensity. "He tried to turn you against me, didn't he?" he murmured, his thumb stroking her jawline. "Filled your head with lies." Alara's breath hitched. He knew. He saw everything. He said you arranged my father's debts. That I was just a pawn. That you don't care about me." Her voice broke on the last words, the lingering doubt a sharp, painful ache. Silas's expression darkened, a shadow passing over his face. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low, fierce growl, utterly devoid of softness now, replaced by an absolute certainty. "Your father's weaknesses were his own, Alara, not mine to exploit. I acquired you because I saw a woman fighting a losing battle against a predator I was already planning to eliminate. I saw something I wanted, something I claimed. And I do not lie about my acquisitions, or my intentions." His gaze bore into hers, stripping away all pretense. What he said was a pathetic attempt to wound me through you, to break what is mine. He paused, then his hand moved to cup the back of her head, pulling her gently, inexorably, towards him. Do you believe him? His voice was raw, a rare glimpse into his own vulnerability, his own desperate need for her trust. Alara stared into his eyes, searching. She saw anger, dominance, possessiveness, yes. But she also saw something else, something fiercely protective, something akin to devotion. The fear that he didn't care for her, that she was merely a trophy, began to recede, replaced by a profound, if terrifying, understanding. He did care. In his own dark, possessive way, he cared deeply. She shook her head slowly, tears stinging her eyes. No, she whispered, her voice gaining strength. No, I don't believe him. Not anymore. The weight of doubt lifted, replaced by a strange, exhilarating clarity. She had witnessed his wrath, seen the depths of his darkness. And in that darkness, she had found her light, her unwavering protector. Silas's eyes closed for a brief, almost imperceptible moment, a silent, profound relief washing over his face. When they opened again, his gaze was absolute, consuming. Good. He pulled her closer still, until their foreheads touched, her breath mingling with his. Because he and anyone who touched you, anyone who assisted him, anyone who even thought of harming you, they are being dealt with. Severely. Alara flinched, picturing the unseen retribution, the cold, efficient dismantling of lives. She imagined the screams, the terror, the desperation of those who had dared to cross Silas Moretti. It was a brutal world, a world where the cost of protection was paid in blood and fear. But for the first time, she didn't just fear it, she accepted it. This was the cost of her safety, the price of Elena's survival, the dark foundation upon which her own complicated security was built. He held her, cradling her head against his shoulder, his large hand stroking her hair. You are mine, Alara, he murmured, his voice a low, possessive rumble that vibrated through her chest, a solemn vow. My prize. And I will burn the world to ashes before I ever let anyone touch you again. Understand. She nodded, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks, but they were no longer tears of fear or despair. They were tears of profound acceptance, of a terrifying, undeniable love. She had faced her deepest fears, witnessed the darkest side of the man who held her, and chosen to embrace it. She found comfort in his absolute possession, a fierce, unwavering certainty in his dangerous embrace. In this moment, in his arms, amidst the lingering shadows of violence and the promise of endless protection, Alara felt utterly, irrevocably safe. And truly, fiercely, irreversibly his. Sometimes, the greatest cages aren't built of bars, but of debt, fear, and self-doubt. Alara's journey reminds us that even when life forces us to the brink, our true worth isn't defined by our past traumas, but by the fire that refuses to be extinguished within us. Her story, and Silas's unexpected, fierce love, teach us that healing can come from the most dangerous places, and that every wound can become a testament to our strength. If this symphony of defiance and devotion resonated with a part of your soul today, please embrace that feeling. Hit the like button, subscribe to join our community of resilient hearts, and let us know in the comments below. I am worthy, and I choose love. Together, we'll keep the music playing.